Welcome to the Jeremy and Andy Talk Movies podcast. This week we are remote as I am in Tennessee and Andy is still in Illinois. And this week we have a very special guest with us. It is our good friend and our pastor, Woody White. So Woody, thank you for coming on the show with us.
Of course. Hey, I am glad to be here. I'm honored to be here. I'm hoping to maybe restore some honor to the family name since my wife was with you all and maybe didn't do as well as we had hoped. So here I am trying to give it the old college try.
That's right. For those of you who don't remember, Woody's wife, Brittany, was on with us to discuss the movie Remember the Titans. We do not give her a hard time just because she likes Remember the Titans, although we do that as well. But Brittany is quite a large personality, and she was so concerned with being on good behavior that she really shrunk down her personality. And so we're going to have her back on sometime to show all the personality that she didn't show that last time.
We wanted unhinged Brittany, and we got tame, polite Brittany.
Yes, exactly.
And that's on me.
That was your fault.
That's on me. I told her.
You got in her head.
Told her to be good.
You got in her head.
I did.
Which is amazing because I don't think Woody's ever been able to tame her any other time. So that was a unique outcome. So what we're going to do this week, we've been talking about having Woody on the podcast for a while, and we decided what was appropriate for Woody to come on and talk with us about is, in honor of it being Memorial Day week, we wanted to talk about war movies. And I know Woody is a fan of the genre, and so we thought what a good opportunity for him to come on. And we're just going to do our Mount Rushmore of war movies. Each of us is going to pick our top four. We did share these with each other in advance. We don't always do that on the podcast. A lot of times Andy and I will just surprise each other. But this time we wanted to share in advance so that we would have an opportunity to make sure we were prepared to talk about these movies. If we hadn't seen any of them, we would have to see them. There were a couple that I had to see just for this podcast, so I'm excited to talk about that. But we are going to just keep this very simple. We're going to introduce the movies. I'm going to give a little background on each of the movies, and then we're going to discuss them. So without any further preamble, we're going to jump into our first selection, which our first selection is one that was unanimous among all of us. And that movie is Saving Private Ryan. So Saving Private Ryan was released July 24th of 1998. It is directed by Steven Spielberg. It was written by Robert Rodat, who will come up again later in this podcast. It stars Tom Hanks, Tom Sizemore, Edward Burns, Barry Pepper, Adam Goldberg, Giovanni Ribisi, Vin Diesel, and Matt Damon. The story plot synopsis is that following Normandy landings, a group of U.S. soldiers go behind enemy lines to retrieve a paratrooper whose brothers have been killed in action. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got a 94% from the critics, a 95% from the audience. It had a $70 million budget. It grossed $217 million domestic, $482 million worldwide. It was nominated for 11 Oscars. It won 5, including Best Effects, Best Editing, Best Sound, Best Cinematography, and Best Director. So, having given all of its credentials, guys, what is it about Saving Private Ryan do you think makes it probably the most popular choice for best war movie?
Let our guest go first.
Oh boy. Okay. Off the top of my head, I think the introduction that you get to the movie with the storming of the beach and the chaos and the let's hold our breath, let's just take in everything that's going on around us, which is really, really hard to do because there's machine guns, there's yelling, there's all sorts of chaos going on. And in the opening moments of that film, it's just like, and I guess I am skipping ahead because there is the anyway, I'm sorry, I'm going to get off topic here, but just that opening chaos where I when I watched it the first time was just holding my breath and didn't realize that I was holding my breath until you got kind of that wave past there, and then you're like, oh, okay, I am out of breath because I haven't been actually paying attention to keeping myself alive. I've been fighting for my life along with all these people just jumping out of boats and getting involved in this fight. So that's number one. And the other one is just two words: Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You obviously can't talk about this movie without talking about that opening 15 minutes. Minus, I know what you were talking about, Woody. It starts actually with older version of, spoiler alert, just older version of who we find out is Matt Damon. But I mean, probably the greatest 15 minutes of film ever put up on screen. I don't argue that at all if anyone takes that stance, which I know some people do. Incredible is not a good enough word to describe that scene. And Woody, I know you're much, much younger than I did, or than I am, but I got to see that in the theater. And you talk about, holding your breath, watch. I assume you saw it for the first time at home, right? On DVD maybe, or...
Yeah, something
Yeah,
like that.
imagine seeing that in a theater full of people. The ultimate, like, you could hear a pin drop experience of my lifetime, where we were all just collectively silent and just probably mouths open, glued to the screen. The the filmmaking, the violence, it's just unbelievable. If the rest of the movie had been terrible, it would probably still be a great movie just because of that scene. And then I 100% echo what Woody said. Tom Hanks. I mean, the narrative around that movie was like Tom Hanks and Spielberg together doing a war movie. This is going to be awesome. And then it was awesome. It's one of those things that exactly lived up to what you thought it would be. And it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I will say the fact that movie, it opens with that 15 minutes, which is probably definitely some of the most intense 15 minutes ever, and graphic and all the things, and still is a good, you don't peak in the first 15 minutes and then the rest of the movie is just kind of a letdown. It maintains its it maintains your interest, and then the ending battle doesn't get talked about near as much because of the beginning battle, but that's incredible too. And then like I said, you just have Tom Hanks giving, Tom Hanks gives a ton of amazing performances, but this is definitely one of them. So
I agree. I had that as one of my notes. I said someday we might do a Tom Hanks Mount Rushmore, but I'll go ahead and spoil it and say that this performance would be on mine. I don't think he's ever been better than he is in this movie. And this is a guy who's had a very celebrated career. I think Spielberg is probably our best classic filmmaker.
yeah,
And what I mean by that is he makes, I wrote the cleanest movies. I couldn't think of a better word other than cleanest movies. And I don't mean that from a content perspective, but from a narrative filmmaking standpoint. He just makes very clean movies. You're following a story, the visuals are going to be perfect. Just, I think of the other very celebrated filmmakers, and they all have a little more of an artsy side to them, or something that's going to alienate some of the audience. Spielberg's the guy who makes movies for everybody.
yeah.
Everybody can connect to Spielberg movies. And I think that's maybe what I mean by the cleanest filmmakers. There's never going to be struggle with understanding what Spielberg's going for, but he just does it the best. I think the only person who maybe could have rivaled him was James Cameron, but James Cameron's more obsessed with his submarines and the ocean than great filmmaking.
Yeah.
So it's just, you're getting something special when you go to a Spielberg movie. And he always finds the heart in stories, and there's so much heart in this movie. Probably something we'll talk about as we go on is war movies in general are usually very heavy. And this one, of course, is very heavy. People, like you said, watching it in theaters were very silent. I didn't experience that myself. I didn't see this till it came out on video. I was just a little young, I think, to go to this movie. And but still, you watch it and you just have that heavy heart. Wow, you feel like you've been through something. But despite that, it still has so much heart in it, in the characters that you follow. And I think that's why I always say, you're right, that beginning battle is the most visceral thing you experience. But by the end, once you know the characters, I feel so much more invested in that last battle as you're following each of the people that you now know from this experience.
That last battle, they do so much more time setting up the strategy and the plan of the battle. Because in that first battle, the plans and, that's irrelevant because you don't know the characters. You're just experiencing the battle. And by the time you get to the end, you've spent all this time with these characters and you're way, way, way more invested in them, obviously, because it's the end of the movie and you now know them and you know about them. So, that last battle maybe isn't as much about the chaos and the intensity. It's a lot of strategy that goes into it, which is a really cool thing too.
Yeah, I think we also have to mention that the character of Jackson, who is the sniper, is just one of the coolest movie characters of all time.
Oh yeah.
I think especially as Christians, you see it and it's like, oh, this guy's quoting scripture and then taking sniper shots.
I just don't think there's ever been a sniper character in a movie that doesn't come across as cool. Even though, like, I know, like, this is supposed to be a very realistic, heartfelt movie about, really what war was like. I know Spielberg wasn't going for cool, but the sniping stuff is unbelievable.
Yeah. And, Barry Pepper, I'll say this, his accent might have been a little all over the place in this movie.
Don't even care.
But he looks the part.
He does.
Looks very cool as the sniper.
He does.
Yeah. I do just want to say it has one of the all-time I don't want to watch this / this makes me angry scenes, and that's the scene with Adam Goldberg's character Mellish getting stabbed by the German.
Oh my gosh!
While Upham sits on the stairs. I rewatched this movie again this week in preparation for this podcast, and when that scene came, knowing it was coming, I was getting pre-angry, and then it was happening, and I was getting angrier, and I was just like, I just never want to watch this. Every time it's on, I should just skip it because it's just going to put me in the most foul of moods.
Yeah, it's definitely a choice, and I remember at the time. I remember in the theater, I don't want to say it got like, I don't know if people were like going crazy or anything, but I definitely remember people like you could feel and hear the frustration in the theater watching that scene.
Yeah, so I know we're probably supposed to hate the German character, but I always leave the movie going, Upham might be my least favorite movie character of all time because he sat on the steps and didn't go help.
I know,
when he could have.
It's aggravating to watch.
Yep. I just also want to shout out John Williams for an amazing score on this movie because I don't know what it is. Like we've talked about this on other movies. When you hear a score and you just go like, "Yep, that's it. That's the score of this movie. That's the perfect music to go with this movie." And the music from this movie is perfect.
It is. Can we put Woody on the spot real quick? Woody,
absolutely.
Since you singled out Tom Hanks, I'm not going to quiz you or anything. I just want to ask you what is your favorite Tom Hanks moment of the Saving Private Ryan? Is there one that sticks out to you?
I wouldn't say it's a favorite. I think there is one scene that sticks with me because obviously Tom Hanks is their leader, and as a guy who's put in a lot of leadership positions, there's one moment or one decision that he makes in the movie that has always kind of resonated with me in a way. It's when they are on their way to go get Private Ryan, and there's the bunker, and he makes the choice, even though it's out of the way, that he wants to go make sure that bunker is taken out. And all of his men say, hey, we shouldn't do this. Somebody's going to get hurt. And they end up, I can't remember who they lose off the top of my head, but they end up losing one of their soldiers. And that's always resonated with me because at the end of the day, Tom Hanks, Captain Miller made the call. And he had to live with the results that one of his men was going to go home, not breathing anymore. They were going to go home in one of those coffins instead of with everybody else. And had he made the decision not to do what he thought was right, yes, there would have been that one person living. But in his mind, his conviction was how many people are going to die if we don't take this out. And so that's always been one. It's not a favorite. I wonder if Captain Miller would take that back if he had a do-over on that. But to me, that's always been one of those moments where Spielberg did a really good job showing, hey, leaders have to make decisions and live with those decisions. And so I've always just really appreciated that scene.
Nice.
Okay.
I do have another one. When on Normandy, when he picks up the helmet and all the blood and stuff comes out, that's a pretty gruesome moment too.
It's unbelievable. I'm like Jeremy. I rewatched this movie this week. Having seen it probably 20 times at least in my lifetime, and just those visuals and that kind of stuff it's still unbelievable that Spielberg filmed that, and it's just unreal.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts they want to make sure we share before we move on from Saving Private Ryan?
I'll just throw in real quick. Great Matt Damon in this movie.
It is. I loved reading in the trivia that I didn't realize this movie was cast and maybe even filmed before Good Will Hunting came out. And Spielberg cast Matt Damon because he wanted him to be an unknown, and then Good Will Hunting comes out
And
before
he-
this movie is released, and he's suddenly a big star.
Huge star.
Because I just always assumed, oh, he grabbed a young star to play this part, but he wanted the unknown, so that was interesting.
Yeah, I just think he's really good in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. And just fun fact, if you didn't know it, the little story he tells about his brothers to Tom Hanks' character was Matt Damon just ad-libbing. He just made up that story on the spot, and they said that's why it's kind of an awkward story and doesn't really like have much of a point. And they were like, but it's what fits the character. That's what somebody would say, or talk like in that situation. So
Yeah, he did a great job.
yeah. All right. So that's our first installment on everybody's Mount Rushmore, Saving Private Ryan. I think universally acclaimed. And
Oh yeah.
I don't think you're going to meet many people who are going to pick 4 war movies and not include Saving Private Ryan.
Right.
Our next one is also unanimous among us. So we all had 2 picks in common. And our next movie is 1917.
Yeah.
So 1917 was released. It was limited release December 25th of 2019 and wide release January 10th, 2020. So it always gets credited as a 2019 movie based on its limited release. It's directed by Sam Mendes. It's written by Sam Mendes and Christy Wilson Cairns. It stars George McKay and Dean Charles Chapman. The movie is about an infantry battalion assembles to wage war deep in enemy territory. 2 soldiers are assigned to race against time and deliver a message that will stop 1,600 men from walking straight into a deadly trap. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got an 88% from critics, 88% from audience. The budget was an estimated $95 million. It grossed $159 million domestic, $384 million worldwide. It was nominated for 10 Oscars. It won 3, including for sound mixing, visual effects, and cinematography for my guy, Roger Deakins. That was Roger Deakins' second win. He had been nominated. I think he's been nominated 16 times, though. All right. So 1917. What do you guys think?
Woody, we'll let you go first again.
Okay. If this movie was half as good as it is, and the cinematography stayed the same with the, I think it's cinematography. I'm out of my depth here, but with the basically trying to make it look like it was one continuous shot from start to finish.
Yeah.
It would be on my Mount Rushmore because it's just such a cool thing. And such a neat way to tell a story. It's a 2-hour story, and it looks like it's all happening. I have no idea how long it actually took to film that, but just to have that sort of story unfold in what appears to us as 2 literal hours of just trying to get from one place to the next, is really, really cool. And so if the story was half as good, I'd still probably have it up there. Maybe not in the 2 spot, but it would still be up there.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy and I talk sometimes about gimmicks in movies. The 2 hour or the continuous shot thing is a gimmick, and then in this case, it's a gimmick that works completely. And I agree with Woody. Just what a really interesting way to tell the story, and it obviously because you feel like you're right there with him that whole 2 hours, you're so invested. Because you just literally feel like you're walking and doing this journey alongside him. And so this is a case where the gimmick, completely the correct choice and completely works and it completely pays off. And I agree with you completely. That alone puts this movie in an upper level type of situation because it is so flawlessly done. And I think, I rewatched this too this week. I think it was really smart. I'm sure it was a choice. I didn't do the research, but to cast more unknown people. So, even though we just talked about how great Tom Hanks is in Private Ryan, something, especially in a war movie, I think about having unknown people, makes it a little easier maybe to just jump into the story and the situation because you're not watching A+ movie star Tom Hanks. You're watching these 2 unknown kids, and that just makes it something about that just makes it a little easier to just jump into the story to me. But yeah, I thought this was awesome in the theater. I actually had not seen it many, many times since then, maybe 2 or 3. So rewatching it this week was a real treat and just incredible. And I'm like you, Woody, and I know a lot about movies, but it's like the whole time you're like, how did they do this? Like it's so seamless. It looks so good, and it comes across as so well done. And Yeah, this one just held up really well for me.
Well, I'm probably not going to say anything unique now after what you guys said, but yeah, the one shot gimmick I do love as well. The movie, as we said, beautiful to look
It
at,
is.
and I think that's one of the things that really it makes it rewatchable. I guess is people. I know some people had complaints like, "Man, there's not much story," but I was like, I don't need story. Like the visual, the visceral experience of just going on this journey with the guys. I mean, there's knowing what's going to happen, rewatching it, and watching like 5 minute stretches of them just like walking across rough terrain and the tension with the music and the look of it. And I was like, I'm glued to the TV still, on my whatever this is, fourth watch probably of seeing this movie. And you're right about the unknowns. Now, one thing that we probably could have mentioned right at the top is true of almost every war movie is there's usually great cast. For whatever reason, they usually get big names for all these bit parts, and they do that again in this movie. All the biggest names pop up in the movie for like 1 to 5 minutes, but it's these two guys you're with for the rest of the time. And great casting because, again, spoiler, the one who makes it all the way through, the one you really follow all the way through, has just a great expressive face for what he's going through all of this.
Absolutely.
Because there's not a huge amount of dialogue. He doesn't have to do a lot, but you just have to see on his face everything that he's going through. And then, there's almost all great movies that we're going to talk about will have some great moment, especially in war movies. There's something that you like sort of rally behind and like get, almost a fist pumping moment, even if it's not, in Saving Private Ryan, there's probably no moment where you feel good, but there's little moments of triumph where you're like, yes. And this movie has a great fist pumping moment. It's when he's at the end of his journey. He's just got a little more trench to go and he can't fight through enough of the people to get his message delivered. And you can see him thinking, I need to just climb up and make this run on flat ground, but he's going to be putting himself in harm's way. And when he climbs up and starts that run, and then people start charging, and so he's running through enemy fire and all the people running against him. That is just one of the best movie moments that, really, honestly, it's probably one of my favorite movie moments of all time.
It's incredible. It looks incredible. The way it's choreographed, everything about it's incredible.
All right. Anybody have any? Again, I don't ever want to move on too quickly here.
Did you see this in the theater, Woody? No.
I did not. I saw this. I saw this at home, which is good because I didn't really. To me, it was just another movie when I saw the trailers for it, so I wasn't too interested. And then I started to hear some of the stuff about how it was shot, and so I sat down and was just, okay, give me your best shot. I don't know much about this, but let's see it. And so I thought they did an incredible job with that. I think is it Blake that spoiler alert doesn't make it all the way?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Do we do spoilers on here? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I will say that was when that fight happens. That's one of the most shocking things in that movie because it feels like it's such a mundane, like you guys were kind of saying, like it just kind of feels like we're watching people walk through fields, and then suddenly there's this intense, like, oh, he just got stabbed, and so I really love how they did that, and the rolling shot I feel like really helped with like kind of surprising you with that a little bit because you're like, oh, the camera's still moving, it's still going on, so we're just kind of walking, and then the next thing you know, there's a little bit of a tussle there. So that would be my.
It's really great, and it gives you that anything can happen, nobody is safe type of feeling. That just whether you even realize it or not, it's keeping you kind of on your toes for the whole rest of the movie. Yeah, it's really well done.
All right. Well, so we're halfway through the Mount Rushmore for all of us because we've all got 2 picks in: Saving Private Ryan, 1917. And this is where we finally diverge a little bit. Woody breaks off from us here, but Andy and I have the same, have a third pick in common, and that is the movie Dunkirk.
Yeah.
So Dunkirk was released July 21st, 2017. It is written and directed by Christopher Nolan. It's starring Fionn Whitehead, Mark Rylance, Damien Bonnard, Barry Keoghan, Tom Hardy, and Cillian Murphy, among a slew of other people. The plot synopsis: Allied soldiers are surrounded by the German army and evacuated during a fierce battle in World War II. That doesn't do a great job of really describing what this movie is,
No.
but we'll talk about that more in a bit. On Rotten Tomatoes, it received a 92% from critics, 81% from audience.
That
It has
seems low.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were thrown off by the style of the movie, but it had an estimated $100 million budget. It grossed 189 domestic and 530 million worldwide. It was nominated for 8 Oscars. It won 3, all below the line. It won for sound mixing, sound editing, and film editing. So, Andy, I'll let you go first since this is a common pick between the two of us. What are your thoughts on Dunkirk?
Well, I mean, we've spent a long time on our podcast talking about Nolan and singing his praises, and this is just, I don't want to. I think this is just a movie only Nolan could have made, and he just brings his unique filmmaking tricks to it. Again, kind of a gimmick, but the 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week type situation that's going on, that is handled so well, and it's like you don't even realize. But it's like once you know it and once you've watched the movie, you're like, man, that is how this movie needed to be told, so that he could cut between the 3 stories. It's so well done. I'm so glad I got to see this movie in the IMAX theater. That's how Nolan wants his movies to be seen, and it is just an incredible visual experience. I guess just one thing that's remarkable to me about this movie is just how good it is. Considering how long, you go these long stretches with zero or very, very little dialogue. The fact that Nolan keeps this movie interesting and that you're invested, and it's just such a showcase of Chris Nolan, but just such a good movie. And, we've joked about it on here before. Another Tom Hardy has his face covered, doesn't say anything performance that works. And, it's just kind of the spectacle that Nolan lives for. It's a really great combination of Nolan's prestige and spectacle merged together.
I've said before, this film is one of those films that you could freeze almost any frame of the movie and make a poster out of it because the whole thing is shot beautifully. So, again, shout out to the cinematographer on this one. You mentioned it, the 3 timelines plot device is exactly right. It had to be told that way because the people being on the beach, they were there for a week. People on the boats, it took a day, and the fighter pilots was an hour. And if you tried to put that in an actual linear way, the movie would have been so off balance.
It would have, yeah.
And it just wouldn't have worked. It is, like you said, it's one of those movies that has multiple lives to it because the first time you watch, it's all surprise in what's happening. And the second time you watch, when and you're looking for things, you start to see oh, that's in this timeline, and then it's happening over here in this timeline, and you start to see that things actually overlap, and they gives you those clues throughout of how they're coming together. So that is really cool. But what this movie does so well to me, and this is another one, like you said, the audience score seems low. This is another one where people came out of it and they're like, I don't get it. There was no plot. Nobody talked. What was this movie about? And you're like, this movie was about the atmosphere of it. It's a great tension building movie. It really it starts tense and it keeps that tension throughout because it's trying to give you the sense of that's what it was like to be stuck on this beach and just feel like you're constantly under threat, is this constant tension that's being built. And of course that's Hans Zimmer's score contributes to that really well. He's got that great ticking element to his score that just adds that it feels like it's ticking towards something, and so you're always on edge. And going back to your 1917 point, the unknown actors in, I guess, sort of our lead roles, the 2 guys on the beach, or the couple guys on the beach that are trying to get off, I don't know them and I haven't seen them in anything else. And so it was very easy to accept them as just these everyday guys on the ground in this situation.
Absolutely. I think one of the movie's strengths too, rewatching it this week, it's amazing to me how it just kind of ends. It doesn't really build towards any kind of giant climax, or it doesn't really seem like it's trying to send a big message of any kind. It just literally kind of stops happening, and then it's just written and directed by Christopher Nolan, and I think that works really well, where you just felt like you were experiencing this with them, and once it's done, and you're not, I don't think, meant to necessarily take some kind of big message from the movie, and I think that is effective here.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not about message, but if there is a message, I think it's kind of said by characters at the end, and there's like surviving is enough.
Yeah.
Like the Harry Styles character is worried when they get back to town, they're going to be shamed and everybody's going to boo them or throw things at them because they lost this, this territory in this battle and had to retreat. But they get back and they're welcomed with open arms. And even the one, I think it's a blind guy that's handing out blankets and greeting them and says something, like, congratulations. I don't know what he says, but Harry Styles says, all we did was survive. And he's like, that's enough.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of a message like, yeah, surviving that's a win in these situations. So, Woody, have you seen Dunkirk?
Full disclosure, there are 2 movies on our lists here that I did not get a chance to watch this week, and I apologize sincerely.
Okay, you're a busy guy.
I will take, yeah. Hey, thank you for that.
But whether you're doing it for this podcast or not, you should watch Dunkirk because it's incredible.
Well, you said Nolan, and if that's not enough to make somebody want to watch it,
Exactly.
I guess. I mean, I don't know what will
exactly.
be. So it is officially on
Now
the
I'm
list.
thinking back through what we said and wondering how much we just spoiled for him.
I know. I'm sorry.
Whoops.
Hey, that's all right. That's the risk that I took.
It's such a good movie. It is such a good movie. It's such a great experience.
Yeah. I honestly, I thought about changing one of my picks just so Andy and I wouldn't have such similar Mount Rushmores.
Yeah.
And I rewatched all my picks and tried to watch all these movies this week, including some others I was just considering. And in the end, I was like, to be true, I've got to keep Dunkirk on here. I can't take it off.
Yeah.
So our next one, we're going to transition to one of Woody's picks, one of Woody's unique picks. And that is the movie The Patriot. This is The Patriot starring Mel Gibson, not the one starring Steven Seagal, in case anybody's wondering.
I accidentally watched the Steven Seagal one to prepare, and then I just watched all of Steven Seagal's movies. So.
Happens to the best of us, Woody.
It does.
The Patriot, released June 28th of 2000, is directed by Roland Emmerich. It was written by Robert Rodat, who wrote Saving Private Ryan. I told you he would come up again in this episode. The movie is starring Mel Gibson, Heath Ledger, a young, relatively unknown Heath Ledger, Jason Isaacs, Chris Cooper, and Tom Wilkinson. The plot synopsis is a peaceful farmer, Benjamin Martin, is driven to lead the colonial militia during the American Revolution when a sadistic British officer murders his son. I'd say that's accurate. That's a pretty good summary.
That's a great description.
Of the movie. Yeah. Rotten Tomatoes, the critics were not as kind to this movie. They gave it a 62%. Audience gave it an 81%. It had an estimated budget of $110 million. Domestically, it grossed $113,215,000 worldwide. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, didn't nab any wins. So let's throw this to Woody. Woody, why The Patriot?
Well, hey, I didn't know you were going to talk about how it didn't win anything and how everyone apparently hates it on Rotten
You know what,
Tomatoes.
Woody? Critics' scores do not matter.
Let me tell you something.
They don't. They don't.
They don't, no. Neither does Oscar nominations, which it did get 3, so that's something.
Yeah, if you like a movie, you like a movie. That's good enough.
Yeah, sure. And that's kind of what this movie is to me. So just to tell you how old I am, I was 5 when this movie came out. And for some reason, I'm sorry, I just made Andy upset with me. For some reason, I remember this being on TV a lot. I don't know if it was something that just ran on the 4th of July. So I just have a lot of familiarity with this movie. It was my introduction to both Mel Gibson and Heath Ledger as actors. So I kind of, when I see them in another movie, I think, oh, they're the people from The Patriot. So, which was interesting watching The Dark Knight and thinking, oh, that's the guy from The Patriot, right? But I love, Benjamin Martin. He's just got a code. He doesn't want to get involved in the war. He wants to protect his family, and the British officer violates that code, and so he jumps into action. And it was my first taste of like, oh, this is what revenge is like when he gets to murder someone who murdered his son, and I just remember being like, oh yeah, that was such a good payoff. And I can't tell you as a 5-year-old how many times I reenacted him running across the field with a flag, out in my yard, and just a really victorious moment. And one of the things that I like out of my war movies that we haven't really got to talk about yet, but I'm a visual person, and I loved history in school, so getting to see historical movies and kind of retelling of, hey, this is kind of what it would have been like, is really, really important to me. And so I put a lot of weight into stuff like that. And so that's probably why I would give it a higher score than some of the critics. But those are just a couple of the reasons. I'd like to know why you people hate that movie so much.
I would like to say for the record, I do not hate the movie at all. It is a super enjoyable movie. And you're right. It's great. It's a very satisfying revenge movie because they do such a good job of making that bad guy just so despicable. And so many times when you're like, okay, Mel Gibson's going to get him, he's going to get him, and he doesn't. And so when he finally does, it's very satisfying. I have nothing against The Patriot at all. It just doesn't quite jump into that prestige to me. And that's fine. Not every, Jeremy and I talk about this all the time. Not every movie is meant to be prestige. Sometimes it's just like, you know what? I want to see people shoot cannons, and Mel Gibson, like you said, sprint across the field with a flag looking awesome. And mission accomplished. So I have nothing against this movie at all.
Absolutely. Some people call it the Remember the Titans of war movies.
Nice. Is one of those people perhaps on this podcast? Let's find out.
I don't know. I'd have to ask him.
I would never insult The Patriot by comparing it to Remember the Titans.
Okay.
I like this movie. I do.
Yeah.
I loved it when it came out when I was in high school. It was one of those movies I got on DVD and I watched over and over again. In fact, it's one of those ones that probably the way I think of it now and how much I enjoy it now is actually lessened by how many times I watched it before. There's sort of like a law of diminishing returns. It's in fact the only movie I didn't rewatch this week that's on our Mount Rushmores, and part of it is because I was like, I don't need to rewatch it. I've got that movie memorized. I did go on YouTube and rewatch some important scenes just to sort of remind myself. But yeah, I'm all in on The Patriot. I think The Patriot is a lot of fun. It's got one thing going for it that none of the other movies on our list are going to have going for it, and that's that it is meant to be enjoyable, right? Like, so most war movies, like I said, are all about like war is bad, it's dour, you're supposed to feel bad going out, and it's nice that
this movie wants you to clap.
The Patriot, and like I said,
cheer.
those fist bump moments that you maybe get one or two in most war movies. This movie is like it's a fist bump movie. Like, yes, good guy's gonna win, the music's gonna swell, let's go America. It's a fun time. And I just got to say this, Mel Gibson is really good in this movie. I think that's what I'm always struck by is I think Mel Gibson is a really good actor. I think everybody would recognize that prime Mel Gibson was a really good actor. Even though I don't think this is Mel Gibson's best movie, I think it might be the best he's ever been in a movie.
He's really great. And he really balances loving father and warrior. Like he really strikes a good balance there.
Yeah, I think that's what maybe allows him or makes me think it's such a good performance is he gets to play all the notes. Early in the movie, he's playing
he's
it very
believable in all of them.
Very like reserved and kind of anxious, and then he also gets to be loving, like you said, as a father. Then he gets to be the warrior, but he also is like wise and cunning. He just gets to be all the things, and he's got a great expressive face. He shows all the emotions very well with his face.
Yep. So yeah, don't feel like people don't like The Patriot, Woody. It's a good movie. It's really enjoyable.
I was actually glad to see you picked it because it's like I'm happy to talk about The Patriot and defend it a little because you're right. I think the critics are I don't know, a little too. It's before there was backlash against Mel Gibson, but I'm sure that's part of why people now are down on the movie.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I do. I guess I want to shout out just before we move on. You mentioned it, Andy, but the villain being really good. Jason Isaacs as the villain, he's a great villain.
He
in that
does
one.
exactly what a villain's supposed to do. You want to see the villain get what's coming to him. So mission accomplished.
Yes. All right. Woody, any closing thoughts before we move on from that one?
No. I could talk. The problem is I can't just say one thing because I do really enjoy this movie and there are a lot of those scenes. But I will just say one more thing then. This is what I do on Sundays, right? I close 4 or 5 times. But the scene where they're like, I feel like it's really the kids' first time realizing how awesome their dad is when they go and shoot down on the caravan. And you get the aim small, miss small, awesome quote there. But then it ends in, hey, I'm going to throw this axe at your head while you have one of my kids. And it's going to be the coolest moment ever recorded for just a few minutes until more cool moments happen. But we have to talk about that a little bit. So let me just throw that out there and we can move on now.
I'm glad you threw that out because that is awesome. You are correct.
Lots of great little flourishes. I love the concept of him taking the little toy soldiers that his son had and melting them down into bullets. So, it's like a symbol of his revenge. That's good stuff. All right. Our next movie was brought to us by Andy. And Andy, I can't wait to talk a little bit about this movie. Our next movie is Apocalypse Now. So Apocalypse Now is released August 15th, 1979, by far the oldest movie that's going to be talked about today. It was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It was written by John Milius, Francis Ford Coppola, and Michael Herr. It stars Martin Sheen, Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, Dennis Hopper, and a slew of other people. Plot synopsis. Let's see what they have to say about this one. A U.S. Army officer serving in Vietnam is tasked with assassinating a renegade special forces colonel who sees himself as a god. This one got a 97% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes, 94% from the audience. It had an estimated budget of $31.5 million, which we'll talk about what that was at the time. And it grossed $96 million domestic, 104 worldwide. It was nominated for 8 Oscars. It won 2 for Best Sound and Best Cinematography. Andy, talk to us about Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, just truly one of the greatest movies ever made, I think. And I don't throw that term or that phrase out, just to anything. I've often said I think the 70s is the greatest time for movies, and just for there's just a creative freedom and a fearlessness to 70s movies. And I think it's summed up so well in this movie. This is I think of this as like the ultimate war is hell movie. It is in no way, shape, or form trying to make war look interesting or fascinating. I mean, it is just showing war is awful and here's what it does to people. And then you combine that with, Coppola coming off of the Godfather movies earlier in the 70s. He's a genius. He's kind of a mad scientist, and if you do any research in this movie, it's wild. I mean, the making of this movie is wild. It was a disaster. Sets were destroyed by a hurricane. Martin Sheen had a heart attack from stress while filming this movie, just the stress of trying to complete this movie. You had Marlon Brando coming in, just an all-time Dion Waiters performance, but he was a disaster apparently, and he didn't know his lines. But yet it all comes out. I think
Can I just add to that? It was supposed to be filmed. It was supposed to be filmed in 6 weeks. It took 16 months.
Yeah.
So if that tells you anything about what a struggle it was.
That should sum it up. I think the ultimate appeal to this movie is summed up actually by what you said, Jeremy, about Saving Private Ryan, when you're talking about how Spielberg is such a clean, neat storyteller. I loved the 70s movies because they are the opposite of clean and neat. There's, like I said, there's a fearlessness to 70s filmmaking. There's a controlled wildness to 70s filmmaking where they were not afraid to take big risks and take big shots. And there was just something about movies at that time where that just was working. And I think this just may be the ultimate example of that. And I just love the idea of just basically you're on this journey of madness with all these people. And I just think it's a beautiful movie. It's a fascinating movie. It's a complicated movie. It's messy. It's all the things, but it just works to me, and it's just always been one of my favorite movies.
All right. I watched this movie for the first time just a couple days ago.
I can't
in
wait to hear what
preparation
you
for this.
think.
And it's one of those movies, having never seen, you can't help but know some things about as a movie nerd.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew a lot about the troubled production and just all the stuff around the making of the movie. And as I was watching it, my first thought was like, no wonder this production was troubled. There is so much happening in this movie. Like
There's a
every
lot going
scene
on.
is like the most things happening.
Yeah.
I at the end I was like, I wonder what the budget was on this movie just for colored smoke, because every scene just has so much colored smoke everywhere. But it's a movie that I wish I had watched multiple times over years so that I could actually have a chance at sorting through all my thoughts and questions.
It's a lot
Because
to take in.
I thought this has to be it's probably one of those movies they study in film school, and it would make sense because it's got so much of the good and the bad of like, here's what's great in filmmaking, here's what's bad in filmmaking, and probably a lot of behind the scenes. There is a documentary about the making of it. I'm
Heart of
fascinated
Darkness.
to go watch that documentary. But my first thought was like, it's so impressive in the making of it, but I also just don't even know what to think about it. I do think that,
that's fair.
Like a lot of movies in the 70s, I was probably meant to watch this on some sort of drugs.
Yeah, I think that's you're probably not wrong.
I mean, from the soundtrack that heavily features the Doors to just some scenes are just really weird and bizarre. Like you said, in the 70s, they just go for it.
They do, and that's exactly what I mean when I say it's not a clean, neat, tidy movie.
Yeah. The other thing I think with movies from that era too is I think you get great acting performances from the top guys, like the headliners. You're like, man, these guys, what great actors. No wonder they're like famous actors from that generation. But I always feel like the supporting cast is a little more hit or miss with the acting.
Fair, yeah.
And so like, I'm like, man, Sheen is great.
He is.
Duvall is great. Hopper's great. Brando in his Brando-y way is good. You can tell he's kind of mailing it in, but it's like he still has a presence. And then several of the guys like on the boat with them and stuff, I'm like, who are these guys? Did they literally just pick guys out of like the street and say, come be in our movie?
That is entirely possible with as chaotic as this movie was.
It is. And I read on the trivia that one of the guys on the boat with them was like on drugs the whole time they were filming.
Yeah.
And I was like, comes through in the performance.
It does.
Because he's insane.
You know, and as is the case with a lot of 70s movies, especially these ones that are considered masterpieces, you know, Apocalypse Now is not man, I can just watch this movie at any time I want. I mean, it's a commitment and it's a mood. Like, it's not just oh, hey, I've got a couple hours, I just want something, you know, that I can just sit, you know, it's probably a movie I've rewatched once a year for the last 30 years, 25 years, let's say. But, you know, it's a mood. I mean, it's not just I'm going to put this on while I straighten up the house type of movie. It's not a rewatchable. You know, like you and I, Jeremy, talk about the Rewatchables podcast. Woody, I think you know the Rewatchables, don't you? Have we talked about this?
Yep.
Yeah. You know, it's not. It's not. But when that mood does hit you and you do watch this movie, it just works for me every time. Every time.
Yeah, I think it's 2.5 hours long, and there's so much jam packed into it. I was really thinking that. And like I said, I watched a lot of these movies in the past several days to get ready for this podcast because that's what I do as a host. Like, I'm invested. I do my homework. But
You do.
Watching this among a whole bunch of other movies, I was like, this is like having eaten several meals, like kind of consistently, and then somebody plopping down like a gigantic steak. It's like, it's enjoyable, but man, I'm struggling to get through all the bites because it's just so much. Like, I could see why, like, usually what I would need is clear my plate, be like, okay, I'm ready to sit down and invest every bit into this movie because that's really what it requires. And it's just hefty. It's a hefty movie.
It is hefty. And just a quick shout out, it's got an unknown at the time, Harrison Ford. Well, not unknown. He had done Star Wars, but Harrison Ford pops up when it wasn't a huge deal to see Harrison Ford at that time. So
right. It was like the Saving Private Ryan story. It was done before Star Wars came out.
Yep.
and then Star Wars comes out, and
all of a sudden
everyone's
Harrison Ford's huge.
What's Harrison Ford doing in this tiny role? Well, he wasn't Han Solo yet, so
It wasn't. And just a quick shout out to Robert Duvall, who is just insane in this movie. He was so good.
it is. You said it. It's not a movie that wants you to feel good about war and wants you to feel bad about war. And man, just like every character in it, you're going like,
These guys are
people are the
crazy
worst.
because of the war. Yeah.
yeah, like I mean, so Robert Duvall's character is he's a charge of a group of helicopters, like helicopter squadron, and they need to get to this location on the water for this boat to go on this mission. And they're like, it's a hostile area, and he likes surfing. And when he finds out that in this area they need to take over, there's great waves for surfing, he's like, all right, that's all you had to say. And they go in and like just wipe out this whole village so that they can surf
wild.
a little bit.
And that's nice. Again, going back to that 70s, just the wildness of the filmmaking, where it's like, hey, we're going to give this character's trait is that he's crazy and he loves to surf. It's just wild. I assume this is one of the two movies, one of the other movie that you didn't watch.
I figured. It is.
I just
Jeremy just assumed it. So.
Yeah.
I told people how old I was in 2000. Everybody knew that this is.
Everyone knew you weren't watching a movie from 1979. Probably feels like it's 600 years old to you.
Yeah.
Is that back before they had color?
There is some color in this movie. You'd be surprised to find out. Yeah.
Yeah, I was -5 when this movie came out. But I'll say this. For being a 1979 movie, I can't believe how good it looked.
Well, even just the opening credits with that, basically just an enormous fireball up on the screen, while the Doors song plays. That just looks incredible. It's amazing. I think if we had, if Woody didn't know anything about this movie and we showed it to him with no context, I bet you he wouldn't have guessed it was from 1979.
Yeah. But I'm going to guess Woody also probably would not love it if we didn't give him any context. Because I'll say it shares.
That's true.
I would not say it's like my final pick, but I think it's a little hard to consume on first watch, like my final pick, because it's not a real traditional story. It's a descent into madness story, and so it just kind of gets more chaotic.
Yes, and
as it goes.
Those take a lot. It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah,
yep.
And that's
Woody. If you're gonna watch something, between the two movies you didn't watch Dunkirk first. Make that a priority, and then worry about Apocalypse Now later.
I was going to ask you what mood I need to be in to watch it, because you said it takes a particular mood.
Gosh, that is a loaded question.
I could probably answer it easier with what mood you can't be in. You just can't be in the mood for something light and fun. Like you have to know, like this is going to be heavy and strange.
It's strange. There's no kind of satisfying conclusion. It's not building. It's the exact opposite of The Patriot. Patriot is crowd pleasing and, like Jeremy said, fist bumps and popcorn. This is like rainy day, sit in the dark. It's a mood, that's for sure. But yeah, just think the opposite of The Patriot. Yeah.
All right. So when I think I need to watch a movie, but The Patriot would just
too
make
happy,
me furious. Yeah. Okay. That's
when
it's
and
ready.
Probably don't watch this with Brittany. Like, I don't think she would. I think she would make it through about 9 seconds of this movie and be like, "This is stupid. I hate this." So, but if you want to brush up on your important film resume, this is a very important film. If you read any kind of 50 greatest movies of all time list, I can guarantee you this movie is going to be on there. And like Jeremy said, if you ever did do like a deep dive into it, there's a making of doc. There's just a lot of fascinating information, I guess, about this movie out there in the world. So,
Andy, I did want to ask you: have you ever watched any of the other cuts of the movie, the director's cuts or the final cut, whatever it is?
I've watched Apocalypse Now redo.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple different cuts. I will admit I go into those type of things not wanting to like them because I am all about, I want to see what was released in the moment.
Yeah.
So the other stuff is good. There's good stuff, there's good scenes, but there's also stuff where you're like, I can see why they didn't do that. So I'm 99% of the time, I'm just going to be a fan of what came out originally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know reading in the trivia, they cut it down significantly, in large part because Francis Ford Coppola had sunk a lot of his own money into the project.
Yeah, I
And
think
so,
he went bankrupt maybe twice or something. It's
mortgaged his house, everything. And
I
so,
can't believe nobody's ever made a movie about the making of this movie.
yeah. So it was very important to him that it also be commercially successul. And so he thought, he agreed with the studio when they said cutting it down, it has a better chance of it being successful. And I would agree because, like I said, it's already 2.5 hours. And it's a heavy 2.5 hours. It's not one of those ones that's like, 2.5 hours flew by. I was like, that's 2.5 hours that I felt like I watched a 5-hour movie with as much was crammed into it.
You don't need to hang out in this world any longer than you have to. It's not a good hang.
Have we really have we talked you into it, Woody? Are you feeling like excited to go watch this dour?
If you want to feel terrible about yourself in life, Woody, just go watch this movie.
I mean, I just texted Brittany, hey, get it ready. Like, we're going to wrap up.
A great date night. I mean, no. But I don't want to paint a negative picture. I do think this movie is a masterpiece. I just want to be clear, if anyone hears me talk and decides to go watch this movie, you're not going to be high-fiving your buddy afterwards.
Yeah. I think probably
So I did want...
Go ahead, Woody.
I did watch a quick... I felt bad that it was the oldest movie and I didn't really prepare. So I watched a quick, hey, give me a couple ideas about this YouTube video. And as I was searching Apocalypse Now summary, everybody, all the searches, tried to fill in and meaning because it left me like, oh, okay, this is one of those movies that you walk away not really having a full understanding of everything that they were trying to convey in it, and it kind of leaves you hanging in some way. So I kind of knew just from my quick Google search and YouTube experience that it was one of those that kind of left you with some room to dwell on it and try to come up with.
I'm really glad you said that, because I'll just quickly say that's another reason why I think the 70s movies are so great. They're not, so many of them are not in the least bit interested in spelling things out for you or taking you neatly, cleanly from point A to point B. There's just, here's what happened. Here's what I'm showing up on the screen. Interpret it how you wish. So that's an important point you made without even having seen the movie. So job well done.
Hey, thanks. I'll be back next week.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Hey, anytime.
Absolutely. Next up is my final pick on my Mount Rushmore. Just to recap, I don't do a good enough job of doing this with each one. Recap, I've got Saving Private Ryan, 1917, and Dunkirk. And then my final one, so that was the same as Andy's. His final one was Apocalypse Now. My final one is The Thin Red Line. The Thin Red Line was released, limited release, December 23rd, 1998. Wide release, January 15th, 1999. It was directed by Terrence Malick. It was written by James Jones and Terrence Malick. It stars Jim Caviezel, Sean Penn, Nick Nolte, Ben Chaplin, John Cusack, Elias Koteas, I don't know how to say his last name, just to name a fraction of the large cast. The plot synopsis, it's a hard one to give a synopsis to, but I'll read as follows. As U.S. troops land on a small South Pacific island, they mount an assault on entrenched Japanese positions. The story explores their various fates and attitudes towards life or death situations. I think I got that summary off of Rotten Tomatoes. Speaking of Rotten Tomatoes, 80% from the critics, 80% from the audience. It had an estimated budget of $52 million. It grossed $36 million domestic, $98 million worldwide, so worldwide really saved it. It was nominated for 7 Oscars. It won 0, which deeply upsets me. I would have given it Oscars for original score, cinematography, maybe even Best Picture and Director, but that can be discussed another time. Since this was my pick, unique to me, I will jump into telling you why I like this movie. And then Woody can tell us why he hates this movie. I did show this movie to Woody once upon a time. It's okay. He just needs a second viewing. Much like Apocalypse Now, as we were talking about, there's a lot to digest in this movie. It is not a typical narrative. It is not Saving Private Ryan, where it's a clean story of point A to point B, our hero's journey. It is very philosophical. It is atmospheric. It's a sort of wandering, pondering movie. And on rewatching it, I rewatched it last night. which, by the way, kind of echoing what I said about Apocalypse Now, it's not a very easy casual watch. It's a nearly 3 hour long movie that feels like you're watching a 6 hour long movie. And as I was watching, I was like, I'm doing this for the pod, but this is not the mood I need to be in to watch this movie. But the music sets so much of the stage. Hans Zimmer does the score, and it is perfect for this movie. It's a brilliant score, and it scores as you have these characters wandering through this situation. And so I hate to compare it to Saving Private Ryan. It naturally gets compared to Saving Private Ryan because it came out in the same year. They competed for Best Picture against each other, and they lost out to Shakespeare in Love, which is ridiculous.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
But whereas Saving Private Ryan, the characters in that movie are all competent, I think is what I would say. Like, you're following a group of competent soldiers on a mission, and that's an enjoyable way to follow through a story. This movie is about people who are very lost, who are very conflicted, and it's a lot of voiceover narration, and a lot of the narration is just sort of these musings and questions about life and the meaning of it and the meaning of death and struggle. It is a lot of people just panicked and riddled with fear in this situation as they're trying to so much of the story is them just trying to take a hill, and the Japanese are embedded at the top, and anybody knows anything about warfare, you have the high ground, you have the advantage. And so it's just a really challenging thing for them to do. But when I rewatched this movie, the first time I watched it, I'll be honest, it took me, when I was younger, how old was I when I watched this? Like 16. I had to watch it in 3 sittings, like an hour at a time, and then stop because it's like, man, this is just like, it's kind of long and slow and wondering. And it wasn't until later in life, rewatching it, that I was like, man, this movie is brilliant and I love it, which is why I think, Woody, you just need to give it more watches, which I get if you don't, because if you don't like a movie the first time, why keep going back to it? But those are my sort of broad and general thoughts. I'll give some more specifics in a little bit, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork. So I'm going to let Andy go first to delay the inevitable Woody backlash. Andy, what do you think about Thin Red Line?
So I think, to put it as simply as I can, I like it. I don't love it. I do appreciate it. And I get, I've said before, I think, Jeremy, talking to you maybe privately, the worst thing that could have happened to this movie is that it came out in the same year as Saving Private Ryan. And right or wrong, for better or worse, it's going to get compared. Whereas Saving Private Ryan had some of the most incredible action ever put on film, this, you're waiting for that in this movie and you just don't get it. So I think if you can climb that mountain and just convince yourself, to be in the frame of mind that you're not watching this is not Saving Private Ryan in any way, shape, or form. But I do think a lot of what I said about Apocalypse Now applies to the Thin Red Line, where you've already said it, you have to be in the right frame of mind to watch it, and you have to understand going in, it is a movie about, like you said, mood and atmosphere, not about thrilling, state-of-the-art, I've never seen any battle shot like this ever in my life. And, again, I'll say, unfortunately, because I saw this in the theater. Saving Private Ryan was the summer, this came out in the winter, and people still had Saving Private Ryan in their brain. So you watch this, and, unless you are just a lover of movies, I do think it's fair. I don't know if fair is the right word, but I understand, I guess, where people's mind goes to, like, well, I just want to go watch Saving Private Ryan now. But, I do think if you will give this movie a chance and try and stick with it, I do think it's a rewarding watch, because it is, Terrence Malick's considered a kind of a master and a genius, and he gets all the praise. And then this is his, him applying what he does in films to a war movie. So I appreciate it. I don't have the love for it like Jeremy does. Obviously it wasn't on my Mount Rushmore, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's, you can get online and you can see stuff, I think maybe now people are starting to appreciate it a little bit more, but I definitely remember, in the moment for sure, of like most boring movie ever, which, I'll take it over to Woody now, because he might be one of those people.
Yeah, so I'm going to be as fair as I can to this movie.
Be as mean as you want to be.
So it's not about, I'm not going to be mean to the movie. I'm going to be mean to you, Jeremy. Because
even better.
When you showed me this movie, You even said it as you were reading the synopsis. You're like, I don't even really know how you can explain this movie. You gave me no warning about what I was going to watch.
That is not
you
true.
You gave me no indication that what I was going to watch was not a movie about characters, but a movie about like just being in war. And so I want to be fair to you. Had I known, no, I won't even say that because I will not blame you. I will say, if I watch it again, I know for a fact that I will appreciate and enjoy it because I'm not waiting to get to know one of the soldiers as the main characters, because the soldiers aren't the main character. The main character is the war.
Yeah.
Like, it is just people coming in contact with the war and leaving the war, and all the stuff that they're leaving behind at home that they kind of talk about. And so I know for a fact that if I watch it again, I will enjoy it. And so I thank you for exposing me to it. But I fault you for the 6 months of hate that it got, because, and maybe I shouldn't, because it's kind of an impossible movie to explain. Hey, this is what you're getting into.
Yeah. You shouldn't hate me because I did warn you. I told you, you said you like war movies. And you said, what's your favorite war movie? I said Thin Red Line. You're like, well, let's watch that. And I was like, I'm going to warn y'all. It's not a traditional narrative style movie. It's very different. It's very philosophical. You might not like it. I don't know if we should watch this. And you're like, no, let's watch it. We kind of watched the preview. I was like, it's just, I'm telling you. And you said, let's watch it. And we watched it. And I was like, yeah. I just don't think until you really experience it, you just can't understand the weird non-narrative style that it is.
Yeah.
It takes an extra viewing to get used to it, whether you know it or not going in. So instead, I want to talk about some of the specific things that I like in this movie. It does small moments really well, and I say small moments like sometimes they're in big circumstances. So there's moments. My favorite character in the movie is Captain Staros, who's played by Elias Koteas, and he is the captain who is very caring for his men, and he's being ordered by Nick Nolte's character to send his men to charge up this hill, and they're just getting mowed down, and he is trying to say, can we do this instead? Can we try another way? And finally he just says, I refuse to give that order. And Nick Nolte kind of freezes, like, you want to repeat that? He's like, I've lived with these men for 2.5 years. I will not send them to their death. I refuse to give that order. And it's just a really powerful moment. You don't see in a lot of war movies, and the humanity in that moment. And then some of the other favorite moments is John Cusack has a great moment where he doesn't say hardly anything. He's talking to Nick Nolte's character again. Nick Nolte's character wants them to keep charging. And use momentum they've gotten from overtaking one stronghold to push them on to the next. And Cusack points out, like, they're not getting any water to their front line, and guys are starting to pass out from it. And Nick Nolte's like, yeah, we'll try to get water, but we don't want to ruin this momentum. And Cusack's like, they could die from it. And Nolte goes on this whole tirade about wanting to accomplish this, and we need to take advantage. And then I've been waiting my whole life for this, and you don't know what it's like to be older and still waiting for their chance to prove themselves. And he just keeps going. And the whole time Cusack just looks at him, doesn't respond because he's his subordinate, but he just stares at him until Nolte twists all around back and forth. And finally he's like, all right, can I get a couple runners to go look for water, to give in? And it's just a great moment of, again, small moment of humanity in this big ordeal. And then the last one that is a little more sort of your standard movie fare is Jim Caviezel's character Whit at the end sacrificing himself. He's with two other guys, and they get surrounded by the enemy, and he runs off in the woods and draws the attention of the enemy in order to let the other two guys get away. And he runs as long as he can until they eventually surround him, and then that's how his character dies at the end. So just self-sacrifice is always a big part in war movies, and it's always something that we esteem in people when they're willing to sacrifice themselves for the good of others. So last thing I'll say is it's got an all-time gut punch moment, and that's in the character of Bell, who is the guy who's constantly motivated by his wife. We find out early in the movie, this is one of those things, first time through, I would never have remembered, but on multiple watches, they say that he was an officer at one point, and he quit because he didn't want to be separated from his wife, and it was taken away from his wife, so they made sure that he was enlisted in infantry. it's sort of like a spiteful thing. So he's in this infantry because his love for his wife. And the whole time he's just thinking about his wife. And near the end of the movie, he gets a letter from his wife where she's like, I met someone else and fallen in love. I want a divorce so I can marry him. And you're just like, what a crushing moment for this guy who's been so like just motivated and obsessed with getting back to his wife. So yeah, just a couple of things that I love about that movie. But we'll move on. We'll move on to our final movie for today. Woody's final pick for his Mount Rushmore. Woody's got Saving Private Ryan. He's got 1917, The Patriot, and his final movie, a movie he wasn't going to disclose to us until this podcast because he said he was worried we weren't going to count it, which we will. We were going to count anything he wanted, is the movie Brothers. Brothers was I'm going to give some little background. I'll let you
you're
go
right.
with it.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Brothers was released December 4th, 2009. It was directed by Jim Sheridan. It was written by David Benioff. It has two other writers credited who wrote this was based on a foreign film. And they wrote the foreign film. David Benioff adapted it for the U.S. version. David Benioff, most people might recognize that name from Game of Thrones. It is starring Tobey Maguire, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Natalie Portman. The plot synopsis is another one that's hard to summarize really quickly. I actually wrote my own synopsis because I didn't like any of the ones I read. Sam is a U.S. Marine. His brother Tommy is an ex-convict. While in Afghanistan, Sam is captured, presumed dead back home. Tommy gets his life together while caring for Sam's family, and when Sam returns, his life is falling apart. So it's sort of a role reversal movie. Rotten Tomatoes, critics, again, weren't very kind to this. They gave it 64%. Audiences gave it 62%. It had a $26 million estimated budget. $28 million was the domestic gross, 43 worldwide. And we don't have to talk about the Oscars.
Not necessary.
Woody, you have the floor.
Yeah, I admit that my reason for picking this movie is not it's not a universal reason. So I wanted to give a little background as to why this is on. First of all, are we going to do honorable mentions or anything?
We can. I was going to leave that mostly off, just leave a little meat on the bones in case we ever want to talk more about some of the things that we didn't talk about fully in this episode.
Okay. That's fine. There is one movie that I think probably deserves to be on here in place of Brothers, but I watched it one time and I knew that if I put it on there and you guys asked me questions about it or we wanted to talk about it, I didn't know it well enough to have like a good conversation about it. So the reason that
what that one is, if you want.
Okay, so Black Hawk Down was going to be the other one that I thought, wow, this is awesome. So I don't know where y'all fit with that because it wasn't on your Mount Rushmore either, but. So Brothers,
it's a good movie.
Yeah,
we approve.
Cool, awesome. So Brothers, I learned about it at a very interesting time in my life. So one of the reasons that I love war movies, other than being part of the Call of Duty generation, is that my Uncle Jeff, shout out Uncle Jeff, he's a veteran. And so he was getting ready to go on deployment to Afghanistan, and he found this movie and told my dad about it, who is his brother, because it's kind of like, this whole brother dynamic that's in this movie. He thought it was really funny because that's just kind of the humor that he has, kind of, dark humor. Like, hey, don't, stay away. Basically that idea. And so one of the biggest reasons that I enjoyed it is just the time that I found it in my life. The other reason that I really enjoy it is it does a really good job of showing the other side of war. That, hey, these are actually people. I mean, Tobey Maguire's character was a great dad before he left, right? And so then he leaves and he comes back a completely different person. And granted, he had some pretty significant circumstances that would cause that, but that's not he's not the only person ever that's gone through that in war. And so the reason that I have it on my Mount Rushmore is that it's the back half of war. It's after you run across the field with the flag, after the fist pumping moments. Here's what happens when you get home, and now it's not about survival anymore. It's about picking up and caring for your family the way that you used to. And so it is the back half, and it is that other side of war that isn't glamorous and isn't fun. And I think they do a really good job. There is one dialogue that happens in there that does a really good job of explaining that. It's after Tobey Maguire kind of loses his mind and he's out in the front driveway. The cops have been called, and one of the cops says, "You're a hero. You're a hero. Just drop the gun." And he's like, I can't say actually what he did say, but he essentially says, "I'm no hero. You don't know what I've done." And that, I think, is just a beautiful is the wrong word, but a really, really crystal clear illustration of what it is to be a soldier coming home from war. And so that's why I have put it on my Mount Rushmore.
Andy, would you like to go from there?
Yeah. Once again, Woody, just because this wasn't on my Mount Rushmore doesn't mean I don't think it's a well done movie at all. Honestly, this is a movie that I feel like in a way kind of got forgotten. I mean, now it kind of lives on because you do see that, clips, like YouTube clips of kind of Tobey Maguire's famous freak out scene when he's, just losing his mind and destroying the house and arguing with Natalie Portman and everything. But it even showed in Jeremy's reading of the critic and audience scores where this movie just didn't land with people. But I think your analysis is exactly right. You're seeing just a different side of war, and it's powerful. And maybe this is like kind of your version of Apocalypse Now, how I feel about Apocalypse Now, where you're like, I know this is not a traditional movie. I know that this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it connects with you in some way. So I don't fault your pick at all. I think it's a powerful movie, and you got to shout out Tobey Maguire from being able to be kind of goofy, lovable Spider-Man to this. He's really frightening in that scene where he's losing his mind and everything, and he having that freak out. So kudos to him. And Jeremy and I have talked about on the podcast before. I mean, Gyllenhaal's always good. So I have nothing against this movie.
I had not seen this movie until this week. I watched it for the podcast. So it was one of the two movies that was new to me, Apocalypse Now and then Brothers. I think this movie really suffered from bad advertising when it came out. It's one of those ones I kind of get. It's a hard one to summarize in a preview without also like giving too much away. But the previews, and maybe it's my misreading of the previews, I really felt like the previews was making it look like a very dramatic love triangle thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like war was sort of the pivot point, but it's going to be this whole like, oh, this guy comes back, but now she's in love with the brother, and how do they? And I was like, I just really don't want that sort of melodrama. And I was really pleasantly surprised watching the movie that it doesn't really lean heavily into that. It really only like dips its toe in that at the most, and it does really focus more just on the brotherly relationship, and the focus is this guy needing to get better. I essentially from the previous thought he was going to be the bad guy coming back. We'd be rooting for the Gyllenhaal character, and it doesn't go that route. And I was very glad to see it not go that route and actually just play more for like realism than for a dramatic love story. So, yeah. Thanks for getting me to watch it, Woody. I wouldn't have watched it if you hadn't picked it. I also want to shout out just great child acting performances from the two girls that play the daughters.
Yeah, they do a great job.
Yeah. All right. Did you feel better now? Were you worried that we're going to come on here and crap on your choices, Woody?
I think the Patriot was the one I was most worried about. But the Brothers, I knew probably I've assumed that it would be around 60%, and some of those I didn't think it didn't really get a whole lot of press, and not a whole lot of people know about it when I tell them about it. But no, I felt okay.
Yeah.
And I'm leaving feeling great. So thank you guys.
You should never be ashamed of any movie that you like. That's a thing I fully believe. Don't worry about critics' scores. Don't worry about audience scores. If you like a movie, then you like the movie. So, and I don't think any of your choices were bad at all.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I just want to recap our choices. So then I'm going to point out some things about them. One, well, not one. I'll just start with this. we all had Saving Private Ryan
Yeah.
on our list. We all had 1917. Andy and I both had Dunkirk. Woody had The Patriot. And then our final spots on our Mount Rushmore. Again, we didn't rank these in order in any sort of way, but my final spot was The Thin Red Line. Andy's was Apocalypse Now, and Woody's was Brothers. So just because I'm a nerd, I looked at certain things with the movies that we picked, and I wanted to throw out some stats about them. So Apocalypse Now got the highest critics score of any of these movies, which surprised me, not because I think it's a revered movie, but my understanding of it was always that people didn't get it when it first came out.
Yeah,
and that it took time.
I definitely think
But
that is part of the narrative. I think a lot of the like even Roger Ebert, one of the most famous critics, critics would oftentimes revise their stance on a movie, especially back in those days.
And I think that must be what happened because, 97% I think it fits what I know the reputation is now.
Yeah.
But I also remember hearing Martin Sheen say when it came out, he told his kids, like, it's going to take 20 years before people appreciate this movie. And in 20 years, though, people are going to appreciate it for forever,
He kind of nailed that one.
That is kind of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not surprising, the highest audience score was Saving Private Ryan at 95.
It's not a surprise.
It also had the highest gross, including adjusted for inflation. Like I said, it made $482 million. Just using kind of an inflation calculator that I found online, it said that'd be the equivalent of about 935 million today.
Yeah.
It led in both Oscar nominations with 11 and wins with 5. I was really shocked by this. You know what the most expensive movie was that we talked about, adjusted for inflation?
The Patriot?
By far.
Yeah.
I was really shocked to find out. It would have been Apocalypse Now as the second most adjusted for inflation, but The Patriot even blew that away. So it was a $110 million budget, which would be about a $204 million budget now, which is not anywhere close to like the most expensive movies all time. But again,
I bet you
adjusted
back
for inflation.
I bet you back
adjusted for inflation. There's a slight delay for the audience to know, so it's sometimes hard to pick it out. Adjusted for inflation, Saving Private Ryan was 135. Apocalypse Now was 144. So Patriot being 204 is like a significant jump.
I was just going to say, I bet at that time too, Mel Gibson was probably making like $25 million a picture. I mean, he was a lister.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
The longest movie of any of these, because war movies are almost always notoriously long, is The Thin Red Line at 2 hours and 50 minutes, beating Saving Private Ryan by 1 minute.
Wow.
I wonder if they did that on purpose. They're like, we're going to trump you by 1 minute.
We're going to get you by 1 minute.
The shortest movie on here is Brothers at 1 hour and 45 minutes. It beats Dunkirk by 1 minute. Mm-hmm. It's 1 minute shorter than Dunkirk. So those are just some nerdy stats that I wanted to look through with these movies. So I think that is going to be about all for us. Not that we've gone for 1 hour and 22 minutes already, but like I said, we could talk more about the movies we almost chose. Mm-hmm. Our honorable mentions, but I do want to leave some meat on the bone because there's a lot of good war movies, and we may want to do this again, or just even if it's not this exact format, just talk about some of the ones we didn't get to talk about today. But I definitely want to thank Woody for joining us today.
Thank you, Woody.
It was really fun to have you as a guest, and we'll definitely have to have you back on.
You were a great guest
to talk about something else.
Hey, thank you. I love the Lord of the Rings. Just throwing that out there. If your audience likes that as well, I'd love to talk, but we will need more than 1 hour and 22 minutes.
Fair enough.
My gosh, would we ever? I want to issue a challenge to you, Woody. Watch an old movie. You are so young. Watch a movie from the 70s sometimes and report back to us. It doesn't even have to be Apocalypse Now.
All right. Text me 5 options. I'll watch one by the end of next month.
Okay, will do.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yep.
And we will see you next week.
All right. See ya.